Good evening. My name is Jennifer Bangser, and I'm honored to welcome you all this evening to the Trust Forum at the Westport Library. Aside from tonight's significant event, we have an exciting and important new program we'll be launching next week at the Westport Library called the Common Ground Initiative. This will be a collaborative forum for public discourse on topical issues of importance to the community. It has been created in conjunction with community leaders representing a wide array of constituents and ideological perspectives. The goal is to make a noticeable shift from winning arguments to making progress. Our first event will take place here this Tuesday, May 2nd, when we welcome a former U.S. Senator from Missouri, Roy Blunt. Mr. Blunt earned respect for the willingness to work across the aisle in the legislative branch to achieve principled bipartisan compromise. He will be in conversation with Steve Parrish, Westport's own. And now, please join me in welcoming Connecticut Public's President and CEO, Mark Contreras, for tonight's program, Bridging Our Differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. We're delighted that you're here. I wanted, before we get going, to thank a few folks. We're doing this in conjunction with Braver Angels of Connecticut. And I wanted to single out four folks who have been really working with us very closely to make tonight a reality. Gary Holland, V. Caggiano, Al Smith, and Craig Diamond were part of the core team that helped us put this together. And we are forever grateful and hope we'll do this again. We also wanted to thank Mike DeLuca, who's the president of Hearst, Connecticut newspapers. Audra Antrim, you have probably seen around here, putting all of the details together. Audra's over there. Thank you, Audra. And Jennifer Keller and Bill Harmer at the Westport Library. And obviously, Lucy Nalpathanchil, you'll be hearing more about her later. So I just wanted to start with, why are we doing this? Connecticut Public is the state's primary media organization and affiliate for both PBS and NPR. We're a community-based, independently governed, nonprofit focused on serving the people of Connecticut. Since we're in Connecticut, I thought the Constitution would be relevant. James Madison wrote several Federalist papers, but the most relevant for our discussion today is Federalist number 10, which he wrote in 1787. So let me just share three quick quotes from that. This is, again, remember, 1787. The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished. The second is, as long as the reason of man continues to be fallible and he is at liberty to exercise it, different opinions will be formed. And the third is, so strong is the propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. So they're old-fashioned words, but they're relevant today, don't you think? In short, Madison suggested that humans have been fighting with one another forever, and his proposed constitution would be hardwired into our system to make it to have a peaceful way to resolve what will be inevitable differences. So here's why we're doing this tonight in 2023 in Westport, Connecticut. We can't have fists flying at school district meetings. We've had that in Connecticut. We shouldn't allow screaming in city hall meetings from our elected officials. We've had that too. And we can't continue to have shouting matches of people talking past each other in order for Madison's democracy to function. In short, our democracy, our American democracy, was not architected for a my way or the highway approach. It's architected for approaches that you'll hear tonight from Lucy, Monica, and Wilk. We hope you can take the lessons and tools that they offer you as you go out and contribute to your American democracy. I wanted to start by introducing Lucy Nalpathanchil. Most of you know her. She is, in my mind, one of the great celebrities of Connecticut Public, and I would agree. Lucy has been a journalist for 21 years. The last 7 has been as the host of Where We Live, Connecticut's 9 a.m., very, very difficult, very frequent show. And she did it with grace and aplomb and has super high following on the radio. About 6 months ago, we said we really want to dive more deeply into the community. And with Lucy's grace and agreement, she became Connecticut Public's Vice President of Community Engagement. And I think you'll see why all of us at Connecticut Public are so delighted that she took on that role. It's my great pleasure to introduce Lucy Nalpathanchil.
Good evening. It's good to be behind a mic again. Thank you so much for coming tonight. This is my first time at the beautiful Westport Library, and I'm pretty impressed. And for those of you who live in this part of the state, what a wonderful asset to bring the community together. And so thank you so much for coming tonight. And I'll have some more remarks to make, but I do want to bring to the stage these amazing panelists who came from out of state to be here with you tonight. First, Mónica Guzmán, who is from Seattle. And a big welcome also to Wilk Wilkinson from Minnesota. This is Wilk's first real time in Connecticut. He told me he's driven through before. I'm like, I've heard that before. So we'll start the program. Thank you. All right, so hopefully you can hear me. I just wanted to mention that tonight's conversation will be recorded, and I know there was great interest from around the state, from residents, including supporters of Connecticut Public, who wanted to come tonight, and we know that people's lives are busy. They might not have been able to drive down here, so we'll be making the recording link available after this event and through our partner organizations, including Braver Angels Connecticut Alliance and the Westport Library. And we'll be sure to send the link out to our members here as well. So Mark mentioned that some of you are aware that I used to host our daily talk show, Where We Live. And when I hosted that show, as a journalist, our listeners expected me, when I interviewed, whether it was regular citizens or politicians, to ask them about hot button issues, and also to call them out when they might have conflated or glossed over some facts. But what I find really refreshing tonight are Wilk and Monica are not politicians. They're regular people committed to making our country stronger and to help our civic discourse, which has broken down over the last few years. And so with that, you'll see in your program, we have our short bios, but I wanted to just reiterate to you about their backgrounds and why we're so very lucky to have them here tonight. I'll start with Mónica Guzmán, who is a bridge builder, a journalist, and author of the book, I Never Thought of It That Way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. Her book was featured on the Glenn Beck podcast and named a New York Times recommended read. She's senior fellow at Braver Angels, the nation's largest cross-partisan grassroots organization working to depolarize America. She was also a fellow at the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, where she studied social and political division, and a fellow at the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard, where she researched how journalists can rethink their roles to better meet the needs of participatory public. A Mexican immigrant, a dual U.S.-Mexico citizen, she lives in Seattle with her family and is the proud liberal daughter of conservative parents. Mónica Guzmán, it's a pleasure to have you here tonight.
Thank you. I'm really excited. It's good.
Wilk Wilkinson is a conservative, husband, and father living in rural Minnesota. He's the creator and host of the podcast, Derate the Hate. It's a weekly show he started more than 3 years ago. Wilk is also a member of Braver Angels' We the People's Project. It's a group of politically and racially diverse Americans working together to combat polarization. Now, Americans without four-year college degrees make up almost 2/3 of the nation's population, and they're often spoken of, but seldom spoken with. According to Braver Angels, the We the People's Project aims to invite more blue-collar Americans of varying mindsets into the depolarization conversation. Wilk has many titles, also a Navy veteran with more than 23 years in the transportation industry as both a driver and a manager. It's a pleasure to meet you in person and to have you here tonight, Wilk.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
When you came in, you may have seen some comment cards. And so throughout this conversation, if there's something that you want to ask Wilk or Monica, we would encourage you to write your question down, and we'll have members of Braver Angels Connecticut Alliance to gather those questions probably around 7:40 p.m., and I'll be sure to remind you that during that time. There's also a microphone. You'll see it set up over there by the Westport Library banner, and so we'd also love to hear your voices. So when we go to audience questions, also feel free to ask your question there as well. So now that I got that all out of the way, how are you feeling? Monica, Wilk?
Good. I'm still on West Coast time a little. Otherwise, yeah, I'm really excited to meet Wilk. So you all know the pandemic, virtual life, but Wilk and I have been colleagues at Braver Angels for some time now, and finally got to meet him in person, so I'm feeling good.
Yeah, and that feeling's mutual. Yeah, I'm just honored to be here, quite honestly. Again, it's so important that we all get our voices out there. We make our play in this world, and this is a very important platform, and I'm just honored to be here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Now, I mentioned your book, Monica. I don't know if the audience knows. I think it's been 1 year since it was published. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It's been eye-opening. One of the things that I assumed, and in the book I talk about assumptions and their pitfalls, but I assumed that that the book and the message, wouldn't find its way to a lot of political corners, maybe especially folks who are, more partisan left and more partisan right. But it's been such a delight to see that assumption disproven, and to visit with conservatives and visit with libertarians and visit with liberals and realize that we all want the same thing. We are all so tired of the dysfunction, and we know we deserve better and that we're capable of it. And that's been a really great source of hope, and I feel privileged to have discovered that sort of firsthand by meeting and getting to talk to so many people about it.
When I first learned about you and read your book, and obviously you've been a journalist for many years, I was just curious, what was that tipping point for you where you decided, I need to devote my time to this?
Yeah, it was a mix of things. One moment that immediately comes to mind, it was a repeated moment. One of those scripts that sort of repeats itself over and over again. It was after the 2016 election in Seattle, very liberal Democratic place. I'm also liberal. And for the liberals there, it was a really anxious time. And I would go to get-togethers just with my friends or events in the city, and people would start to, bring up the latest outrage in the headline or the latest fear from the liberal side. And then bit by bit, it would creep toward the people to blame, those people who voted for Trump. And so what happened in that moment is I started to feel myself take it very personally, because my parents voted for Trump, and they're awesome. And they are not these things that I'm hearing. And I know where these judgments are coming from. I know where the dehumanization is coming from. I can even relate to it because I share the political temptations and sensibilities. And I don't know where to begin. I don't know where to begin to say into that room, but you've got it wrong. There's more to it than that, and I'm not sure that you're seeing it this way is gonna add up to anything good. And so it was that moment repeating itself over and over, and finding my hack into that was to take a little drink of stout. Wilk knows I like my stouts. Take a little drink of a stout and go, you know, my parents are Mexican immigrants who voted for Trump. And just watch that bomb fall. Just like, phew.
Room goes silent.
Yep, room goes silent, you know, this is Seattle. And then slowly, like, try to see if anyone would ask why, if anyone would get curious. And then I found it to be a kind of privilege, you know, to be able to represent and complicate some of folks' assumptions.
You know, in your book, you're very open that you even struggled when you talked to your family. I think there was a moment where I think you were still in high school or maybe middle school, and you saw a Bush Cheney sticker, was it, that by your mother's desk, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I was in high school, 17, and I didn't think very deeply about my politics yet, but I just sort of felt this sort of, well, obviously I'm gonna be Democrat, because obviously that's the right way to be, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I came home, and it was the year 2000, and the election was coming up, and we had just become US citizens that year. And I remember I found this picture of our family when I was writing the book. I asked my dad to look for it, and he found it, and it's my mom wearing like, what is it, a red skirt, like a blue top, and she's holding a little US flag, and she just looks so proud. And I've got my braces, and there's my brother, and there's my dad, and she's got her certificate, and it was in the New Hampshire State Courthouse. And, but yeah, I came home, and I came into the home office, and I just looked up, and there was a Bush Cheney sign over my mother's desk, and I was like, here? In my house? Okay. You know, and that just started a whole, and we still joke about it, how we couldn't hear ourselves think on the way home from seeing some Michael Moore documentary. It was just such a big fight in the car. And then, and my dad kept trying to turn car talk on like louder and louder, and, you know, gave up at some point, and no one would admit anything, and no one would concede any points, and it all just got louder and louder. So we've had our adventures as a family.
So braver angels, there are these labels that are used. So if somebody is leaning Democrat or a Democrat, they're called a blue. And Wilk, you're a conservative, so you'd be considered a red. And I mentioned that you have this podcast, Derate the Hate, but you also have a career, you have a family. You know, like I asked Monica, you know, what moment was it in your life where you're like, you know what, I need to think about how to help my neighbors and maybe even people I don't know talk to one another again?
Well, I think the biggest thing was all the toxicity I started to see online. And, excuse me, I had very strong political opinions. I at one point was a pretty toxic person myself. And as I started to see more and more toxicity online, I realized that this wasn't going to get any better. It wasn't going to heal itself. People needed to start working in a better direction, because with the anonymity of the online ecosystem and people just being able to say whatever they wanted to say to people they didn't even know, it just, like I said, I knew it wasn't going to get any better. So as that started to fester in my mind, I thought, how can we make the world better? And then it really dawned on me, it's got to be each of us as individuals. It comes down to things that I talked about all the time anyway: personal accountability, gratitude, responsibility. And each of us as an individual has a responsibility to deal with the things outside of our control. So that's what I decided I was going to start talking about, and talking about it as much as possible, in hopes that, those people that were spreading that massive amount of toxicity to these random strangers that they knew nothing about, I just thought it was the right way to do it. So I figured I could either keep on being part of the problem or become part of the solution. And then when the organization Braver Angels reached out to me because of things that they saw me doing online, it really started to embed itself as a whole nother thing that I was as a part of, and it's been absolutely incredible. It's been an incredible journey, and just seeing the strength that movement has, and what it's able to do for people has just been, one of the great honors of my life. So.
I want to make sure everyone hears you, so we want to hold the mic up a little bit
Oh,
closer. You mentioned, so Derate the Hate is the name of the podcast, and your slogan is bettering the world one attitude at a time. And so you talk to people from all walks of life. And I was surprised when I was looking at your feed the other day, you actually interviewed a yogi. Tell me about that.
Well, so Yogi Aaron is just this world-renowned yoga instructor that has a yoga retreat in Costa Rica, and he reached out to me once, and I'm like, yeah, I don't. It's just by looking at me, you can tell I don't do yoga, and so I'm like, yeah, there's probably not a lot going on here that him and I are gonna have to talk about. But when he sent me an article that he had written, and I don't know that I can say it on public television, but it talked about being judgmental, right? And then I thought, okay, well, there's actually something. There's something that we can talk about, and then leading up to it, I started looking at more of the stuff that he does. I dove more into the article that he wrote, and just got to know more about him. And then I had this incredible conversation with him, and just got to know him. So a person from thousands of miles away, somebody that I would never even dream of having a conversation with, let alone having anything in common with. We found a lot of common ground in our conversation, and it's conversations like that make things incredible, because it's the world is made up of all kinds of people, and the only way we can make through this thing together is to have the conversations.
Also, something you shared about that realization that you in some way were contributing to the toxicity that we've all seen on social media. I mean, how many of us look at ourselves and say, you know what, I'm part of the problem. I've labeled people or generalized or been judgy. And so I think that's really, I just want to bring that up again, that you had that realization and now you're doing something to help make a difference. And so I think that's really profound.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the big things that came up in a conversation that I had with Jeff Scoop. He's the former head of the neo-Nazi party here in the United States National Socialist Movement. And one of the most profound leaders of one of the biggest hate groups that the country's ever seen. And I had a conversation with him. And as we were talking, one of the things that he said to me that meant so much was, when people go into a conversation and they're treated like a monster, they don't hear anything else after that. There's no more changing that person's mind. Now, there's monstrous behavior there, but there's a humanity in there somewhere. And if you're ever gonna find it, you gotta speak to them. And you can't immediately start on that platform that they're a monster. So that personal realization is something that everybody has to find on their own. If they don't find it, it's probably not gonna happen, because you can't force that onto somebody. But when they come to that personal realization that I am what I hate, then you got something to work from.
And before we leave tonight, I'm hoping that both Monica and Wilk are going to leave you with some strategies of how to have those difficult conversations, because each one of us has, I'm sure, encountered someone, whether it's in our family or where we work or just a close friend, and the minute you find out, who did you vote for? Like, all of a sudden there's this barrier, and it's too bad, because we're literally seeing relationships breaking down. And you weren't gonna let that happen with you and your parents, Monica.
Yeah, yeah, there was a moment where my dad, we were taking a walk, and he was telling me about a time that he met up with a fellow bird photographer in a Washington State trail, because he's also a bird photographer, and followed him on Instagram, loved him, kind of geeked out. And this other bird photographer started talking about how awful Trump is. And my dad heard himself agree, nod, go ahead and confirm the assumption, which was false, that he, having a Mexican accent and looking the way he did, would not support Trump. And he was telling me this story looking down at the ground as he was walking, and I could tell he was not happy about this. There was a sort of shame. And then he looked at me and he said, I've heard that some parents will not let their parents see their grandkids because of politics. And I wonder if that will ever happen to us. And as a reflex, I just looked at him and said, jamás. No, that's Spanish for never. That's never gonna happen to us, Dad. And then later, I took a beat and I thought about it, okay, that's a promise. That's a commitment, no matter how hard it gets. This is about relationships at the end of the day. And I don't know how, you think of it, but it's hard to want to get to know and understand folks with whom we feel no relationship. So within families, it's also hard to accept when they appear to disappoint you. I think that the divide within families is so difficult because these are precisely the people we have expectations of. How could my mother believe this? How could my own sister? And so it's funny, right, that relationships make it that much more complicated. It's an entanglement. But I think one of the things that we forget in a time like this that is so divided, or that feels so divided, is that we are in relationship with each other because we share the same society. And we know that some little part of how well I thrive here depends on you and you and you and you. And we also, I think, all feel the injustice of feeling when some part of our society doesn't understand some deep part of who we are. And that's politics. Politics is a process of constantly looking at each other, and again, and again, and again, and making sure that we see what's there, and that there's some kind of communication, and that the debates are clear to us, that we're not fighting about something we think we're fighting about, but what we're actually fighting about. And again, polarization hurts us there too, because it makes the debates something they're not. I gotta share this. So the other day I saw a meme online, and the meme was, it was one of those beautifully designed, very, with rhetorical symmetry that makes you really want to root for the idea. And it said, I choose the second grader over the Second Amendment. Right? And I'm on a certain side of the gun debate, and so I go, oh, yeah, all right. But then you think about it for a second, and you go, wait a minute. That's not the binary that it looks like it is, right? The very idea that folks who would want to stand up for and preserve and are concerned about the fate of the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, that these people would want a second grader to die? Right. Where did that even enter our imaginations? But this got hundreds of thousands of shares and tons of likes. So this is what happens is it's this vicious cycle. You judge each other more, you engage each other less. You judge each other more, you engage each other less. So what you're judging isn't even the real people. You're judging an imagined debate, you're judging an imagined persona, and you're losing touch with the reality of your society. But it has to begin with that relationship. It's we are in each other's hands, and some part of us has to remember that.
Wilk, did you want to respond?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that Monica says that's so important is we are presented with these crazy false choices, these false binary choices every single day. And we have now, for the first time in my lifetime, found that so many people have made politics part of their central identity. And when they make politics part of their central identity, and then they're presented with these magnificent memes that present this false binary choice. If they fall on the wrong side of it, they're falling on the wrong side of themselves. And now all of a sudden, I can't do that. So I've got to entrench myself on this side. And it just gets very ugly. And now you're in this self-loathing, anger, whatever. I mean, so the thing that I talk a lot about is how, whether it be some outrage entrepreneur that puts out a meme like that on social media, or some politician presents some false binary choice or whatever. What these people are doing is they're using fear, outrage, and grievance to drive a wedge in between people. And, Monica talks about the story with her folks and how that could have been a very toxic thing for her familiar relationship with her parents. I've seen that happen. I've heard those stories. I've talked to people who have lost lifetime friendships because of, who did you vote for, or what is your position on this? That's not the way that we used to be. That's not the way that we should be. Family has been incredibly important in my life for my whole life, but there's been times where we have disagreed vehemently on any number of things, but we were never at a point where we are going to disband this family because of something that is completely outside of our control. And oftentimes these political situations or these things that you see in the mainstream media, or you see these things from the politicians, or these things from these grievance grifters and outrage entrepreneurs, that's the kind of stuff that people use to enrich themselves and drive us apart. So we can't allow that to happen.
Outrage entrepreneurs and grievance grifters. I like that. So let's talk a little bit more about family. And I want to ask a question of the audience, if you feel comfortable raising your hand. How many of you have encountered these divides within your family where it has hurt relationships? That's a lot of hands. And I wanted to show, we've pulled some data with the help of Braver Angels, Connecticut Alliance, about things that we may not have paid attention to a few decades ago that are so front and center. And so this is about the data from the Public Religion Research Institute and The Atlantic about people who identify with a specific political party who would be unhappy if their child married outside of the party. So back in 1960, by 2018, 45% of Democrats would be unhappy if their child married someone who supports the GOP. 35% of Republicans would be unhappy if their child married someone who supports the Democratic Party. Now, I have a 7 and 12-year-old, and this is not even in my realm to think about who they're gonna marry, but whatever happened to, I hope they marry someone kind, someone productive. Instead, it's, who did they vote for? I mean, what do you think about that, Wilk and Monica, when you see that stat?
When I look at this, I go right back to what I said a few minutes ago, is we have entered this realm where we make politics part of our central identity, and it's ugly. It's not the way that it should be. We used to think of our central identity as what are our values, what are our core values, and how does somebody else, how does that other person we're gonna pair with fit into our core values? The things that people argue about in these political realms, typically you never actually get to hear what the end goal is, what we actually want. It's just how we're gonna get there, and we disagree on how we're gonna get there. So now all of a sudden it turns into this ugly debate of nonsense, really. Go back to the core values, go back to the base of it, and is it a good person, or, is this person a good person? Are they gonna treat my daughter well? Are they gonna be a good wife to my son? That's not, it should not be one of those things we say, do they have an R next to their name or a D? Because it just That to me doesn't make any sense. And I think for too many people, it's gotten to be that point, and it's just nonsensical.
I mean, it's the way you asked the question, and what happened to being kind, right? Well, what's happened is that people believe that the other side is not kind, cannot be good because of the decisions they make. And I think one of the reasons we've gotten here is because of a very interesting logical trap. And I find it to be one of the most pernicious assumptions infecting us right now. And that is that if they oppose what I support, they must hate what I love. You make a political decision, and it's based on something you care deeply about, that you think is so important, and you articulate that to yourself. You know, it's liberty, it's life, it's what have you. And so that's what that choice means to you. And then you say, that's what it means to everyone else, too. It has to be that. So if someone made the other choice, they're crazy, stupid, or evil. There can be no other explanation. And yeah, that's led us to a pretty tricky place. I remember a woman I met, I forget where, it was in California, and she was telling me that she is, very, very, very pro-choice on the abortion debate. And she had an abortion herself, and later she had her daughter. And her daughter has this close friend, and the close friend is conservative. And so the mom is nervous. How close are you? Is this, okay, they're just friends? Okay, good. And at one point, the woman got an opportunity to have a long conversation with her daughter's friend. And nice guy, really were able to talk about it, and they talked about abortion. And so the woman said that she realized something. She thought about something in a whole new way. She realized that, okay, I don't agree that, he believes that pro-life is the way to go here. I don't agree with that. But when I talked to him and I saw how much he respects life, and she realized if my daughter ended up with him, or, if something happened in a pregnancy, if my daughter ended up with someone like him, that he would take so much responsibility. He would take so much responsibility if, a pregnancy happened that was unplanned. And he would be so loving because he got to see that love in him when he talked about these things. And so she realized, yeah, here I was thinking that someone who was pro-life couldn't be good-hearted, and I met someone who was really good-hearted, and I actually realized maybe I would want my daughter to end up with someone conservative, because of that good heart and the values that I saw in him.
I just want to remind the audience, if you have a question for Monica and Wilk, you can feel free to write it down on the comment card or when we go to the mic at 8 o'clock. So you'll see some members of Braver Angels Connecticut Alliance walking around to gather your cards, so feel free to do that. There was something else that I wanted to share with the audience, and thanks to Braver Angel Connecticut Alliance, we wanted to hear from other blues and other reds. And so if we could just pull up the slide so you can see the face of this next woman you're about to hear. Her name is Lisa Anderson. She lives in Bethany, and she's a blue. And we were talking about, how these political differences and divides impact our lives. And so I wanted you to hear how she answered this question. Describe how the political climate has affected you personally. Let's hear it. Shall we try it again?
I can still remember how shocked I was at the election of Donald Trump. I'd gone to bed the evening before, quite smug in my belief that he wouldn't be elected. I woke up the next morning, found out how wrong I was, and felt such a profound grief and despair, which was only heightened when I arrived at my law office to discover that half of my staff had voted for Trump. We were a close-knit working group, sharing both our professional and personal lives, and yet I really felt I did not know them, my beloved staff. I didn't understand what was most important in their lives. This disconnect led me to significant discoveries and changes in my own life. I'm a mediator. And I had thought I was very open and shared my own progressive-leaning community work with my staff and invited them to do the same. One of my primary roles in our condominium practice was to navigate difficult conversations among the 300-plus communities we served. Yet difficult conversations about politics and policy rarely took place in my office. These realizations are humbling. Eventually, the impact of the divide in my office led me to an earlier retirement than I planned. I am committed now to do the work of promoting healthy civil dialogue I left unfinished in my office.
It led her to early retirement. Wilk, what did you think about Lisa's story?
I love the ending. The fact that she has now devoted her life to, promoting civil dialogue. It's kind of, one of the things that's most important to me is I talk about that civil dialogue. And one of the things I want to go back to that Monica said was people often find, and just like she did, she couldn't fathom how half these people that she knew and worked with could be Trump supporters, Trump voters. Because there are so many people that lose sight of the fact that they don't think that there's a noble purpose behind something that this person is doing, because they have come to a conclusion that Trump is evil or Biden's incompetent or whatever the case may be, and they don't look at others, even other colleagues or family members or whatever. They cannot see through their own judgment or assumption about that person, and they can't figure out how somebody else can't see what they see. And it turns into that big wedge between them. So the fact that she was able to reach that, early retirement is, I mean, at least it was a positive outcome.
Monica, you, in your book, you look at what social science has found about our tendencies as humans. We're judgy, but it's deeper than that, and it relates to, what our values are. And my values may be different than yours, different than Wilk's, but it doesn't mean that any of us are bad people, right? So can you talk more about the value index and,
Yeah.
as we encounter people who we don't agree with, to how we think about them as people with individual beliefs and values.
Yeah, so every now and then I run into something that I wish were different in our language because it makes us believe something is true when it isn't. One of those is, I changed their mind. I'm going to try to change your mind. Newsflash, we cannot change each other's minds. We can only change our own. That's it. If you influence someone else, it's almost never in that moment that they're going to tell you, first of all, or that they're going to realize it, right? It's going to be small steps. And if someone does decide to change their mind because of something you've talked about, their mind was already fertile ground for whatever kind of bumped them over the edge. You didn't do that all yourself. So that's one thing. But the other thing that I wish would change about our language is when people say, they don't share my values. I can't talk to them because they don't share my values. So the research that I looked into around values was so fascinating because it turned that on its head for me. We do share our values. We just stack them in a different order for different issues. So going back to, I picked the second grader over the Second Amendment. Again, the false binary. I care about children. They don't. Really? Right? But how often does this idea that they don't share my values? Okay, what are your values? Well, I'm pro-choice. I believe in freedom. Okay, do you think they don't believe in freedom? Is that what's going on? Is it that they don't share your value? And many people have pointed out the interesting dynamic with things like abortion and the COVID vaccine, right? You can't tell me what to do with my body. says two different things, right? Different folks of different political stripes will stack those values in different order for abortion. You can't tell me to do what with my body. I'm pro-choice. But with the vaccine, I think that you should be, mandated to take the vaccine. And so I do want to tell you what to do with your body. So that's the thing, is we all need and want fairness, freedom, collective security, like a kind of equality of opportunity. We all want these things. So let's not believe that they don't share our values. This goes back to, the whole monster thing, and how often, I don't want my kid marrying a monster. But it's not that simple. And in order to see that, it takes sort of unwrapping some of those assumptions. And I think the woman we listened to, may have thought that she knew, lots of important things about the folks she worked with, but there was a lot she's missing. I mean, raise your hand if you want to, if you've been in a small group of people where somebody spoke as if everyone in the group agreed on a political issue, but you kind of didn't. Like, raise your hand if you've been there. Keep your hand up if you corrected them in that moment.
You bring up an excellent point, and that is, we feel that if we're going to be honest, it's dangerous. If we're honest, we're going to be attacked. If we're honest, we're going to be labeled. And we've all been in the room when these conversations have happened. And so when we think about strategies for people here that have come to hear both of you speak, how do we get past that, where we feel like we can be open and honest, and then people aren't going to then say, you know what, I don't want you in my life?
I think one of the biggest things in with relation to that and kind of, relating to what Monica just said, is we cannot make those assumptions. We've got to ask questions. We cannot just assume that everybody that's standing around us is going to believe the same thing that we do. And when we start to generalize, I don't care if it's a group of 5 people, or if it's a political group, or if it's a class that's racial, or a group of people that's racialized as black, or a group of people that's racialized as white. We are all individuals. And every time somebody makes an assumption that everybody in that box that people have been falsely placed into, every time they make that assumption that everybody in that box thinks the same way, they have made a mistake. They have made a mistake because everybody does not. I don't care what box it is, what label's been placed on it. If you make that assumption, you are wrong. You got to ask the question. You got to look at everybody as an individual. Individuals think about things differently, and the sooner we realize that everybody is an individual, not a part of some big box full of something, it's going to be a lot better.
So when we think about how avoid having these conversations on social media, it's one-on-one, back to basics. So Monica, we're both journalists, and for so long I was taught, why? Ask why. Why? Why do you feel this way? What do you mean? But you talk about how it's important to ask how you came to that belief. And there's other tips that you offer people. Can you walk us through some of those?
Yeah, I have 2 kids, 10 and 8 years old, and watching them grow, when they asked why, it was often with, absolute genuine curiosity, and I mean that in the technical sense. Curiosity, a curious question, is primarily motivated by a desire to close the gap between what you know and what you want to know. It's not a gotcha question. You're not sabotaging your own, ability to get information that fills in some gaps for you. That's curiosity. Why is the sky blue? Like, what's going on? In a context of suspicion, division, where people have their guards up, the question why is very loaded. And it can feel like you're being put on the stand. You better justify not just your position or your idea, but yourself. I mean, as Wilk was saying, these arguments feel very much like a part of us. Our partisan identity is very important. You know, we need to hold up a little bit, stand up. So, I mean, so many times that we're having really deep political disagreements, it's almost like we're arguing that we matter. I matter. Well, so do I. No, I matter more. No, I do. You know, it's like a weird way that that's what we're really doing. So when you ask why, people feel like they're put on trial. And so what will they do? Instead of giving you, you know, honest reasons where they're really thinking about their experience, what they're going to do is the safer thing. They're going to go to the reasons that others have taken shelter under, that others have found successful. And they're going to say, oh, there's that meme. Well, you know, I pick a second, because I picked the second grader over the Second Amendment. That's why. You know, and so you start lobbing the grenades at each other, right? Some dishonest arguments start to come up. And even when they are logical, you'll get stuck in a cycle of insisting reasons to each other. So I tell you my reasons, and then what do? Well, then you tell me yours. Well, you know, okay, but this and this and this. And then what happens? You repeat, except you're louder. And that's where you are. So, alternative, ask, how did you come to believe what you believe? Instead of, why do you believe what you believe? How did you come to believe what you believe is saying, I'm looking at you as an individual. You have a unique path. I'm not making the mistake that I've seen so many people make that breaks families apart and so many other connections where, this is heartbreaking to me, where like, you know, it's not just my liberal son or whatever, it's maybe the only liberal that I have like a deep relationship with, or the only conservative, and so I'm putting all the sins that I see from conservatives onto that person. And then where's that gonna go? That's what we're doing to each other. So ask how, and what you get is story. And guess what? Everyone is the world's leading expert on themselves. So suddenly you don't have to deal with fake news and stuff. You just go, this is this person's unique path. And instead of putting you on trial, you're giving me a tour. We're not having an argument, we're taking a walk. And I'm spending time with you. And I'm not just thinking how I'm gonna fight the point you just made. I'm imagining your life. And I'm relating instead of just interacting. And that is the foundation upon which trust is built. That's the foundation upon which people feel they can be more open. Because, oh, you care about me and my own path. Well, all right then. Maybe I'll care about you and yours. And then we'll really have a conversation.
So we should stop sending each other NPR articles to prove a point. Wilk?
Yeah, I just want to expand on that a little bit, because what Monica said there is so incredibly important. One of the things I talk so much about is not allowing our emotions to dictate our actions. And when somebody asks why, and now you are put in a position where you have to justify yourself to somebody else, that's going to elicit that emotional response. And typically it's not going to be, especially if you guys are, if the two of you, or the two people in that conversation are in disagreement on something that may be a very polarizing topic. So now you are automatically in this justification mode. You are now entering the realm of emotions, and those emotions begin to dictate your actions. Whereas the how question is genuinely one of those things where they care about what I think, you know. And if we're going down an emotional track, having that one of that other person cares about me is certainly a lot better track than I now have to justify myself to somebody else. So when we talk about emotions, we talk about personal accountability, we talk about those things, it's a clear path, and it's clearly the right direction to go. So I just wanted to expand on that.
And this all makes sense. And you know, when I read your book, I was thinking, you know, how could I change the way that I communicate with people that I disagree with? But we're also human, and our emotions get the best of us, and we get angry. And when we talk about bridges, we don't want to burn a bridge, but you've got some good advice about when we're in a moment with somebody, and it could be a loved one, and things are getting heated. How do you proceed without burning that bridge, Monica?
Yeah, Yeah, and again, with family relationships, there are expectations we have of each other. So that love actually in some ways makes this harder. People look for hard and fast rules, like a script you follow all the time. There's no such thing. The best that I've come up with is an analogy to cooking, because that was my pandemic hobby. I finally became a good cook, and I was thinking about this as I was writing the book. But heat in a conversation is good. The question is whether you're cooking something or burning something. So, if you're cooking up understanding, that means that there is a mix of uncomfortable moments and tension-releasing moments in your conversation. There's been some research on what kinds of conversations are productive. The idea that we have in our minds is that once things become negative or angry, then, we did something wrong. But that's not true at all. Most productive conversations where people really learn from each other have uncomfortable moments, even deeply negative ones, but they also have laughter. They also have little jokes. They also have something that keeps the glue going. So that's what's important. And the other thing I'll say is that, but if it's burning, that means, you can feel yourself, oh my gosh, something's wrong. You feel yourself get small. It's burning your dignity. It's burning a relationship you truly care about. Okay, then take a break if you can. But the other thing I'll say about anger is that anger and emotion, we also see these negative emotions as reasons to hit the abort button, but they don't have to be. Emotions in a lot of ways, there's something about, they're trying to communicate something too. So if you can say that you hear it, it can really transform the conversation. So the moment I love is anger. If you hear anger from the other person, and maybe you didn't expect it or it's new to you, and you can say, you know what? I didn't know this mattered this much to you. I can see how much this matters to you. Can you tell me more about that? And I've done this, I've seen this. And people's shoulders relax, right? When they hear that, they go, oh, okay. Tell me more about that. Okay, and I'm gonna lean into that emotion and I'm gonna let that thing that feels unprotected and under assault speak. And if the other person gets to hear that, well, then maybe the emotion has just been heard and we can move on, and that heat just led us to see something we wouldn't have otherwise seen.
You've interviewed Jonathan Haidt, who is a social scientist, professor at NYU, and you asked him this question, which I think some people would think it's a valid question. Like, what is your red line? What is the issue or the question or the topic or the person that you just don't want to engage with? You know that it's not going to be productive. So how would you respond to people in the audience who might be like, you know what, I don't want to talk to someone that I know would discriminate against me or would to deny my humanity? How do you have that conversation?
Yeah, I remember what Jonathan said was sort of this simple thing. So I'll pass on what he said, and then I'll add more to it. He said sort of, it's about the game you want to play. If you believe the other person is wrong, and you want to change the world so that your side wins or what have you, if you shame them or never engage, well, that's not going to bring about the world you want. Shaming in a culture war, he talks about how that only makes the other side stronger. It just does. It's not a way to victory. It's a way for you to score your own points with your own side. So if you want to change their mind, which again, bad language, if you want them to change their own mind, then you should engage, he says. If you are curious, because you want to learn, you should engage. So he kind of goes through all these reasons, like you should engage, you should engage. But the thing is, you brought up, someone who discriminates against me, someone who doesn't see my own humanity. Now that gets a lot tougher. And all these places that I've been to, especially schools, I get this kind of question where people go, there has to be a red line, Monica, like tell me what that is. If I am gay, I shouldn't talk to somebody who is evangelical Christian and believes these things. If I am this, and I shouldn't talk to somebody, and we just want those guardrails. We want them set for us so that we don't have to think about it. And I personally sort of reject that idea that there's a universal prescription here. I think that each of us as individuals has to have the right to say, not here, not now. Absolutely not. I have several close friends whose children transition genders. They have zero interest in talking to someone that might where the result would be that they feel that this person is invalidating their child. They don't want to put themselves in that place. And that is their right. That is absolutely their right. Here's the trap, right? Here's the terrible, unjust tension. It's the tension between being safe and being seen, right? If everyone of a certain identity were to say, we're going to be safe by not engaging ever, all of us, for sure, forevermore, then you're not going to be seen either. If you say, well, I want to be seen and I want to engage all the time, then you are going to burn out and there's going to be some really tough moments and that's not going to be good. So yeah, you put being seen over being safe, well, that's also going to be really tough. So what I believe, and we have examples out there, wonderful examples of people who've been able to cross even the biggest bridges. It's possible. Right. But for most of us, cross the short bridges, It's not like you have to talk to a Nazi tomorrow. You don't. You really don't. It's okay. You can talk to someone you mostly agree with and disagree on this little thing. Mm-hmm. And after a while of crossing short bridges, you may feel like there's a long bridge in one moment with this one person that maybe you can cross.
We're getting close to the audience question, but I wanted to go to Wilk quickly, because when we think about the people who model this for us in really profound ways, you told me about this black man, this jazz musician, I believe.
Daryl Davis.
Who made a point to start a conversation with a member of the KKK. Can you tell us briefly about him?
So Daryl Davis is a boogie-woogie blues rock and roll musician, plays the piano. But more than that, he's a civil rights icon who has for decades made it his position. He's from Frederick, Maryland. He's not not terribly far from here. But he has made it his position to have conversations with the people that would be considered his biggest enemy. People who have spoke out with vehement and venomous hatred towards minorities and Jews and things for, forever. And he has been instrumental in actually walking out of those movements well over 200 people. Grand Wizards in the Ku Klux Klan. Jeff Scoop, the guy I mentioned earlier, was a person that Jeff Scoop, or that Daryl Davis was instrumental in getting out of the National Socialist movement. He does this without fear. He does it with genuine curiosity. He will meet them wherever they want to meet. He's been to, as a black man, has been to Klan rallies, neo-Nazi gatherings, things like that, because he wanted to know the people that hated him most and what they had happen in their lives. Just as Monica said, how did you get to this point? And once he started engaging these people as human beings, and they in turn engaged him as a human being, he has been instrumental in changing the lives of not only the hundreds that he has actually gotten to walk away from these movements, but thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people worldwide with the talks that he does and the things that he does and sharing the experiences of his life. One of the most incredible people I've ever had the opportunity to speak with, Daryl Davis, is he's a genius, and he's just a beautiful man. Now, the thing about this is we probably don't agree on anything politically, him and I. But as a human being, he is somebody that I will look up to and be grateful for having those conversations for the rest of my life. So it's not, like I said, it's not about agreeing on everything, but understanding the humanity in these people that we don't agree with, and having conversations.
So if you have a question, please walk up to the mic, and while we wait for you to make your way over there, I wanted to play one more testimonial, and this is from a Red. If we could go to this slide of Elizabeth Dahl, who lives in Bainbridge Island, Washington, so outside Seattle. who's a red. So let's hear how she answered how the political divide has impacted her personally.
So my story of how the political climate has affected me personally, specifically from a text exchange that happened at the end of April 2020. One member of our friend group texted, "We passed China. We're number one," in reference to COVID-19 deaths in the United States. And I replied to explain that, while it didn't make our numbers better, or what was happening in New York at the time any better, China lied through their teeth and was still lying through their teeth. At the time, then another friend, someone who I'd commuted with for years, exploded at me in response. She said that the best thing you can do is stop your rant, as you are not helpful in delivering non-factual information. Stay home and stop spreading false information about China or any other country. You don't know what the F you are talking about. You've never traveled and you don't know anyone living globally. Stop it now. You are spreading bullshit. She worked in healthcare, and so I'm sure that she was really, really, really terrified through COVID. But this wasn't an outlier. This has been the story of my life as a red living on a blue island. It was a really frustrating and hurtful experience, and every time I have these, it continues to be so. These are people that I know, that I love, that I care about, who are my friends. And in this particular experience, I'd just been laid off. We were all afraid of COVID. Nonetheless, she insisted in that moment that I'd been spreading misinformation about China. And it felt like she was accusing me of racism because I hadn't had the same privileges that she'd had to travel the world. And this was an early harbinger for me of just how polarized we were going to become.
So I wanted to play that because we remember how polarizing it was around COVID. And I think, Monica, you've talked about how you would approach someone who may not agree with even the COVID vaccine, how you wouldn't close them out. Can you talk about that before we take this woman's question?
Yeah, I think what I heard in that example is the friend who responded in that text thread was really outraged in that moment, really felt that something awful had happened, and so immediately reacted by, boom, putting this thing on thread. And it makes me wonder if, taking a beat, or if she'd asked a question, something like, "Hey, when you say this, I immediately think of this. Is that what you mean? Or is there something I'm missing?" So we can use questions to slow down the reactions that we have and make sure that they are informed. There was an event not long ago where it was a very, very small kind of debate for a moment between a person who had been a police officer stationed at public schools in a community in Washington, and then a person who was against the idea locally of stationing police officers in public schools. And as they were sort of disagreeing but trying to do it in a better way, the woman who was against this program told the person who was for it and had actually done it, when he asked her, what concerns you about this? She said, "I just think it's fake safety." And in that moment, you heard everyone in the room go, "Whoa," because this guy had just talked about how much pride he takes in providing safety for the students. And she had said it's fake safety. And so I was wondering in that moment, she's gonna take it personally? What is he gonna say? What's he gonna say? This goes south right here, right now. And what he said was, he just looked at her and said, "What do you mean by that?" Amazing. And in that next moment, she said, "Oh, I want you to understand, I know you work really hard. I know you work really hard to provide safety, but this is what I mean, and this is why I feel it might not really add up." But he could have just flown at her, He could have said, "How dare you?" So it's about that. It's, can you take a beat? Can you ask questions? Can you catch yourself in the act of assuming, and then check those assumptions with reality?
So I want to hear this audience member's question, and then I want to go back to the COVID vaccine.
Totally forgot to address that.
It's okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead with your question.
Hi, I'm Loretta Donovan. I'm from Brookfield. We've been talking a lot this evening about adults talking to each other, which happens a lot. But I want us to check something that happens very frequently and we forget. Those are our grandchildren, the young people who we forget are listening in the shadows. I recalled as I was listening to you the wake of the 2020 election when my grandson was truly frightened with the result of the election. He happens to live in Seattle. And it occurred to me that there are people in power who have relationship authority, who have the power of the front of the room in the classroom, the head of the dining table at home. And I want to know from you, how do we help people to check those authority positions and the way in which they're affecting our young people?
Wilk, do you want to answer that first?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating question because, you know, we as, especially as parents, I'll go to your dining room table example. We as parents have the responsibility to bring up our children in the way we want to see them go. And if we scream and yell every time something angers us, there's a very good chance that that child is going to grow up and scream and yell every time they find something that angers them. If we show them hatred or show them that we experience hatred or project hatred onto certain people, there's a very good chance that that child is going to do that thing. If we project upon our children a sense of fear for things that we have no control over, we're doing an incredible injustice to those children. If we as authority figures in our jobs, say you're a teacher, or in my case, my profession is to manage truck drivers. I have to be the calm and sane voice in the room. I don't care if it's the employees that report to me or if it's my children that I am raising. When we as adults, you talked about being adults, if we as adults don't take the personal responsibility and accountability for being the right example for those people, shame on us. And it's just calmer heads have to be the right thing. We need to understand the time and the place for everything.
And one of the things I think that's so frustrating in recent years is when we see people like politicians who have all of this attention speaking in a certain way. Yep. Because that's not a good example for anyone. And so that's what's frustrating, right? And also the media's responsibility and how we cover these stories. You know, obviously when people don't agree and when it gets heated, that gets clicks, that gets views. And when we think about, you know, how often are we covering stories where you have people from differing perspectives who actually are working together? Those are few and far between. And so there's also a responsibility for the media as well. Did you want to say something quickly, Wilk, before we get to the next question?
You know, it's one of those things where I've said it so many times. Toxicity will make it halfway around the world before civility will get its first like and share. That's something that we need to work on because it's you know, our politicians, all the politicians that just do their job and maintain that even keel, they're not the ones that get in front of a microphone, get in front of a camera. So that's something I'd like to see change.
Do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of great advice here that I think can help each of us be better and have stronger relations. But one of the reasons why people argue, especially online, is because they want to influence other people. Now, as you pointed out, you're not really influencing the person that you're arguing with, but you are influencing the people that are looking on. There's an audience. And so there's a reason why people do this. How can people have better conversations and still promote their viewpoints?
Yeah, great question. You know, persuasion is everything. Persuasion is a process that we rely on in our society. It means that whatever perspectives we come from, whatever conclusions we've drawn, there's a way in which we can open our minds to telling ourselves a different story. And that's ultimately what works. The only thing that works. Persuasion happens when I have a story I tell myself about why I believe what I believe on an issue. I have a conversation with Wilk. As I talk with Wilk, I relate to him or I hear something from him that makes me think about something in a different way. Maybe that new thing leads me to tell a better story that fits me better and leads me to a different conclusion. So I have to embrace that new conclusion. That's persuasion. So that's the way it really works. So how do you have these conversations while still standing up for your own views? First off is don't hide them. I think a lot of folks think that when you have these conversations across divides, it means you should just be asking questions, be super nice, don't make them know what you really believe because they'll just get mad. That's not it at all. This is more about temperament, What you just said, I have to tell you, I see it so differently and it actually feels like I'm getting a little upset. But I want to stay with this because I want to understand more of what you're saying. And then they say more, right? And then you do what at Braver Angels we call the pivot. And the pivot is you maybe paraphrase what you've just heard, and then you say, as I said, I see this very differently. Can I tell you what I mean? And then the person is ready to hear you. You've heard them. They're ready to hear you. They might say yes, hopefully. And then you tell your own story. But you don't begin with, you're wrong, it's obviously this. You begin with, here's the path I walked to the conclusion. And they're listening, right? It's in hearing each other's paths where we might see deviations we might want to take. That again, but we'll take them because they fit us better. Not because you shamed me into it, but because it actually fits me better. I'm the only one who can change my mind.
Thank you.
In our polarized times, the reason I wanted to go back to COVID and the vaccine is because we know how painful that was in certain communities, within certain families, because of differences in opinion. And I wanted to bring that up because I feel like it's still percolating, right? So, we think that the pandemic is behind us and people who've gotten vaccinated, great. Those who haven't, they haven't. But there was a lot of that labeling and judginess based on people's decisions. And you did have this really great example, and so that's why I wanted to ask you about.
Can you prompt me with it? Because I want to make sure I know which one.
When we talk about the COVID vaccine, you're someone who believes in vaccinations, but I believe you had someone in your family or you knew someone who did not. And instead of vilifying them or saying, you're irresponsible, you had a way about how you would approach or have that person maybe approach you if they had questions. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, so this is someone who means a great deal to me and does not vaccinate her children, whether it's COVID or anything else, and has deep suspicions about where COVID came from, deep suspicions about the people in power who created these vaccines. We've heard, many people have heard some of these things. And we had a conversation about this, and one of the things that I had to do in that conversation is restrain myself from believing things that I do not know. What I'm tempted to believe is this person doesn't care about health. She's one of the healthiest people in my life. She's extremely healthy. So what is it then? What is it? And so asking how, and hearing from her about how deeply suspicious she is of corporate power, how deeply suspicious she is, and her whole life echoes this. I often say, we don't see with our eyes, we see with our whole biographies. Her whole life echoes, she doesn't want to be near anything that is artificial. And something that's created in a lab just feels artificial, And so as she's saying all this, I'm realizing, I'm relating, I know where she's coming from. Not changing my minds on vaccines at all, but I can see where she's coming from, and I'm receiving these ideas, right? And she's receiving mine. How can you vaccinate your kid? Well, let me tell you about that, right? Here's what it looks like to me. So the conclusion that I drew kind of at the end, and then I think we both kind of came to this understanding is, if someday I look around and I start to get worried that corporations are doing something really awful to the point of maybe harming us with some product, then I'm gonna call her because she received my ideas well, and I can ask her questions. She's been thinking about this for a while. And if someday she goes, you know what, maybe I should vaccinate my children, I want her to think of me, because here's someone who didn't shame me. Here's someone who listened. He disagreed with me, but listened. So the idea being, we want to burn the bridges, but the most important thing to do with a bridge is not to cross the bridge. It's to keep the bridge. Because you don't know what's going to happen in that person's story. You don't know when a different kind of curiosity will strike you or them. And it's leaving the bridges open that allows persuasion to remain effective.
We're almost out of time, which, a sign of a good conversation is you want to keep talking. But I know the library has to close at a certain time, so we want to be respectful of that. But, it's great that we're hearing there's a lot of depolarization work going on, right? In cities and towns across our country, the fact that you traveled here to talk to us about this. But we've got another presidential election coming up. And so when everyone here returns home to their communities, what can be done? And this is related to a question we got from the audience. What can be done to influence politicians and the media with these elections looming to embrace depolarization and not see polarization heightened? Because I think that is a fear, a realistic fear, as we see this next election cycle coming. Wilk, did you have some thoughts?
Well, it's kind of like watching the weather, because you can look at it and you can see the storm is coming, and you can make the choice on how you're going to deal with it. We know that there's going to be increased polarization in the coming election, especially if the two choices that appear to be coming are coming. So with that polarization, we have the personal responsibility, again, like we've been saying all night, to deal with it the right way on our part and try to be the bigger person in the conversations that we know are going to happen. It's one of those things where, again, we see the storm is coming. We can either stand in our driveway and scream at the clouds and scream at the rain, or we can put on a raincoat and help the neighbor put away their lawn furniture. I mean, even if they're a Democrat. So it comes down to personal accountability, personal responsibility.
Monica?
Yeah, I'm just going off of that. And I'm realizing, by the way, that one of the ways that knowing you has influenced me is I'm noticing that power of your individual power, that whatever's going on, there's still things you can do and you don't have to feel so helpless and hopeless. And that's where so much despair comes from. So yeah, for me, it's kind of exactly that. It's put on your rain jacket. Know what that means for you. I have very recently decided I'm going to have a different relationship with the news. I was, during the last couple elections, quite addicted to it. And I think over the course of time, reflecting and researching about some of these things, realizing maybe some of that fear and anxiety that made me like sometimes a more reactionary mother or kept my son from feeling like he could hug me and lifting me up a minute, maybe that wasn't worth it. There's this great quote about fear. Don't waste your fear on anything but danger. Because fear keeps us alive, right? Fear is an incredible evolutionary, superpower that we have. But what fear does to our brains is it makes it so we can survive or we can run away, right, when we need to. But we can't think. We can't think when we're afraid. And I sort of realized that me, myself, my personality, it was too much. And so I'm coming into the next election making commitments to myself about how I'm going to consume the information around me so that I am the best citizen and mother that I want to be. So who knows what that will mean? That will change as I go into it. But this is the piece that I think it feels almost like you're not in control. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. Lots of technological platforms and yes, media organizations. I know how to write a headline that will make you click. Trust me, I can make you click. So that means you have to be more resilient. You do.
And with that, Mónica Guzmán and Wilk Wilkinson, thank you so much for this great conversation.